Today on the program, we'll be looking at sickle cell. There are many myths and misconceptions about sickle cell. In various African countries, if one has sickle cell, such a person is considered a sickler. Some are looked upon as disabled. In certain corners across the continent of Africa, some families will not even permit their children to go into a relationship or marry someone with sickle cell disease. So what is sickle cell disease?
Sickle cell disease is a very worrying condition which is inherited and affects mainly what we call the red cell hemoglobin. So by inherited condition, it means that one can get it from their mother and father. And the red cell hemoglobin is the cells in our blood which actually moves oxygen to the rest of our body for our body to function very well. So when individuals get this condition, often their red cells are, because of the inherited condition, are often formed into a shape, almost like a banana shape, and hence the sickle shape, and hence the name sickle cell disease. When it forms that shape, basically it can block small vessels in our body, and most of those areas that it affects most with that blockage of the vessels are areas where often the vessels are not a lot, so in our bones, in our joints, and by doing so, it can cause significant pain.
Sickle cell disease is one of the most common genetic conditions throughout the world. In the UK, sickle cell is very common in people of African or Caribbean heritage. It affects 1 in 4 people from West Africa and 1 in 10 Afro-Caribbeans. It's also common in people who originate from Mediterranean, Asia and the Middle East.
I was diagnosed quite young. I was born in London, but I actually wasn't diagnosed until I lived in Ghana by doctors over there. And from the story that I've been told by my grandmother is I was about 1 and I'd have sort of moments or weeks where I'd just be crying continuously and there's sort of nothing that they could do to calm me down, and they took me eventually to the doctors to get checked out. And because sickle cell is so prevalent in West Africa especially, the doctors thought maybe I might have sickle cell, so they did the test for it and it turned out I did have sickle cell. So I was diagnosed about the age of 1.
One of the other positive initiatives we have in the UK is that there is a universal screening programme, and that was implemented in the middle 80s, but was fully rolled out, I think, in the 90s. And that's very important because today any child born is tested for sickle cell anemia, so we will know who has sickle cell and who are carriers of the sickle cell gene, or trait as some people call it.
Early diagnosis with proper care, children with sickle cell will grow well into their adulthood. However, in sub-Saharan Africa, that's not the case.
When I was young, we were twins, and my twin sister died at the age of 6. My parents went to the hospital and they told her that I am a sickle cell patient, and that was the reason why my younger sister died.
In developing countries, in African countries, almost unfortunately 70% of the children will not actually survive to see the age of 5. But fortunately, in countries like here, with treatment and regular care, almost 98% are living till adulthood.
So I lived with my grandmother and my cousins, and I think my grandma and my immediate family didn't really fully understand what it was and what the implications were. I think they were told that I would have pain sometimes, and that obviously as a baby that would make me quite cranky and crying.
People born with sickle cell disease sometimes experience problems from early childhood, although most children have few symptoms and lead normal lives most of the time. The main symptoms of sickle cell disease are painful episodes called sickle cell crises, which can last for a long period of time.
I remember my grandma, when I would have my crises, trying sort of African remedies. So I remember having crises and having leaves bound to my legs and then like wrapped with string, because the pain, so when the pain comes, sometimes when you put pressure on that part, so if it's the crisis is in my leg or my arms, if you put pressure on that part for a little while, it kind of takes the pain away. So I remember them wrapping my legs in sort of like leaves that they'd ground up, and they would put bricks on my legs to kind of keep the weight on, to try and keep the pressure, to sort of give me a bit of relief from the pain. So it wasn't well understood, and the kind of the medications and the treatments that they were giving me wasn't something obviously that's now conventional.
A sickle cell carrier is someone that carries the faulty gene that causes sickle cell disease, but does not have the condition themselves. It's also known as having the sickle cell trait. People with sickle cell won't carry the disease. However, they are at risk of having a child with the condition if their partner is also a carrier.
We have a high number of people who live as healthy carriers of the sickle cell trait. So what that means is that you don't get a crisis, you're born with the sickle cell gene, but two people who are carriers, and if they meet and get married or have a family, then they have a 1 in 4 chance, or mother has a 1 in 4 chance of having a child with sickle cell anemia.
My mum and dad, in terms of knowing who was the carrier or if they even carried a gene for sickle cell, they didn't know before having children. They found out as a result of then having me and then me finding out I had sickle cell. So they're both carriers in this case. Yeah, so my mum carries and my dad carries, and then I was the child that then got both their genes for sickle cell. I have a sibling who got both their healthy genes, so she's not a carrier at all. So sometimes that's just the way that that the world works. But yeah, so both my parents are carriers.
Although Jennifer looks healthy and her sickle cell is well managed, things can turn around drastically to cause her to have a crisis if she's exposed to certain triggers, including extreme weather.
Things like flights. If I'm taking a long haul flight, if I wanted to take a flight from London to Australia, long haul flight, you're in a cabin, you're restricted in your movement, things like that, where maybe someone who's healthy you don't have to think about your medical side, you can just book a flight, go where you want to go. Something like that I have to think about. I have to consult a doctor, I have to probably get extra medication, I have to kind of take sort of some precautions, or sometimes a doctor might say, I don't think it's safe for you to do this, so probably don't do it. Or things more in day-to-day life, such as so swimming. When I was a child, my mum was really against me going swimming, especially swimming, like, say if you went to Brighton for whatever reason, you wanted to swim. Swimming in cold water is definitely one of the big no-nos. Or if you do want to go for a swim, even in a heated pool indoors, again, there's just more precautions. So I would go for a swim, I'd maybe only swim for half an hour. I would then come out, quickly shower, make sure I dry off, get a hot drink, so there's things that you have to put in place just so you can do normal things.
Conditions that make the sickle cell disease flare up are such as very cold environment, very hot environment. So clearly in our climate, when it's very hot, it's important to ensure that a child with sickle cell disease drink plenty of water. In a cold environment, make sure they are fully covered. They have appropriate housing which is warm. So for instance, in this country, it's important to actually help children with the condition by providing them with adequate warm housing, which means that they're less likely to get sickle cell crisis.
During a severe sickle cell crisis, patients will experience long excruciating pain and may end up staying in hospital for several days.
The best way for me that I can describe my pain to others, or like to my parents and friends, is it feels like your bone is being hacked at with like a saw, with an axe, like continuous, lots of little kind of like just hacking at your bone, because it's not It's not a pain that's kind of just like underlying pain. You kind of just, when you get like a really bad crisis, it feels like literally inside your bone. It feels like something that you can't just press on your skin and just try to get, you know, maybe if you just hold your skin for a little while, it kind of will like rub your skin away. It feels deep inside your bone. And for me, the best way that over the years I've sort of tried to describe it is, it feels like somebody hammering away at your bone continuously. And it goes through, as you go through your crises, you kind of have some points which is like your peak pain, which is something, you know, the worst pain, and then, you know, maybe like half an hour later it kind of drops a little bit, and then so it kind of goes through little rhythms of, it goes really, really bad, then it kind of tails off a little bit, again really bad. Things like if you move your arm, if you're in pain, if you've got a crisis in your chest and you move you'll take a big breath in and your rib cage moves, again, so lots of little movements and little changes like can affect how bad the pain is, but the overall of it is, it feels like someone's hammering away at your bone, is what it feels like. I have a sort of complication of my sickle cell, which is a hip problem. So I have pain medication that I take for that. So I'll take my penicillin, folic acid, and then I'll take some painkillers. So usually something like codeine and paracetamol in the morning to help with my commute and sort of the activity that I'm going to be doing.
That's this morning's tablets, and then at lunchtime I'll take a different set of tablets and then another set in the evening.
With the antibiotics and painkillers, Jennifer is currently on a new treatment called hydroxycarbamide. Hydroxycarbamide is an effective drug proven to reduce the frequency of painful episodes by 50%.
I'm on a new treatment called hydroxycarbamide, so I'll take that during the day. And then I'll carry on with my work. In the evening, before I leave work, before I leave the office to go home, again with the commute, I will then take another set of painkillers to help with the commute home. I'll get home, I'll try to sort of unwind, have some dinner, talk to family, friends. If I have any evening plans, I'll do that. And then in the evening, I take my last lot of medications. So that's sort of like a typical average day for me.
In the UK, people with sickle cell are able to manage their condition with their medication. But it's still very important to go for regular checkups.
Often they will have regular visits, even when they are well, to ensure that their blood level remains at adequate level, to check that their organs, there isn't a beginning of problems with their organs, and if so, we rectify it before it becomes a problem. And they should be on antibiotics, which prevents some of the infection that they are prone to.
Like most women, Jennifer will one day want to have children, but as a sickle cell patient, to avoid any complications, she will have to come off her new treatment before falling pregnant.
There are luckily a medication that reduces the frequency of sickle cell crisis called hydroxyurea or hydroxycarbamide, and that may have an effect, for instance, in pregnancy, in affecting perhaps the baby. So it's important, if women who have sickle cell disease are on this medication, to actually be on contraception. And when they have their regular visit, it's important for them to plan their pregnancy. So if they are planning pregnancy, then the clinician will take them off that medication and ensure that it doesn't impact on their pregnancy or the baby.
I am probably at an advantage in being somebody that has sickle cell, that if I was to raise a child with sickle cell, I understand better than anybody to raise that child, how to raise that child, and how to manage that. Whereas I was a child of parents who didn't have sickle cell in terms of the actual disease, they were just carriers. There was a lot of stumbling blocks and a lot of sort of like learning to do to get to a place where we all understood what was going on. So as much as I hope and I pray that I don't have a child with sickle cell, if I do, and if me and my partner do, I think we're both on the understanding that we're sort of in the best, or we can offer the best support to that child that anybody could, because I would quite literally understand what that child would be going through.
We know sickle cell is a genetic disorder and a condition that can be managed by medication. But something that sometimes gets overlooked is the impact it has on one's social life, especially when it comes to dating or in relationships.
I'm in a relationship, and I told my partner from day one, from the get-go, I thought it was only fair that they essentially just had all the information about me should they wish to encounter a relationship with me and go forward, that it wasn't something that kind of, and I came and sort of, it wasn't something that they just happened to find out a year on and then decide they can't deal with it. I just thought it was the fairest option for everybody involved. I reached that point actually only because in previous relationships, it has been a problem. Past relationships and exes haven't been able to deal with and weren't prepared to deal with, and I guess that's nothing that I can blame anybody for. It's I guess a big commitment to want to be with somebody that has a lifelong illness that may or may not affect your life as well. So that was something that I was really conscious of and really aware of going into my current relationship.
A sickle cell patient is at high risk of having life-threatening complications such as stroke and damaged organs.
There is the sickling affects the organs in the body, all the organs, eyes, lungs, and so forth, and that has serious complications for people with sickle cell. And for example, it's not uncommon for, whether male or female, for young people to have a hip replacement in their late 20s or early 30s because of necrosis of the hip caused by sickle cell.
The average life expectancy in the UK is 83 years, but for a sickle cell patient in the UK is between 50 to 60 years.
The average life expectancy for a country like UK, Europe, United States of America is about 83 years. This country, for a patient with sickle cell disease, and also in the US and most of Europe, is in the 50s now, so about 50 to 60. That is still a third less than the average person in developed country.
Again, I think I live in this sort of optimistic world of I'm just a normal person who just happens to have sickle cell. I'm just like everybody else, so I'll die when everybody else dies. There was a moment in sixth form where we were in a biology A-level class and we were covering blood disorders, and sickle cell came up, and my teacher picked me out knowing that I had sickle cell in the class and asked me, Jennifer, having sickle cell, does that mean that you're going to die earlier? Because I've read that, the mortality rate for sickle patients is about 49. And that genuinely was the very first time I had ever thought about sickle cell have an effect on your mortality, and the fact that I may die at a younger age, a much younger age, than your average person because of my sickle cell. And it came as such a shock to me. I was speechless, and I'm never lost words. And I was speechless in the class, and and thankfully all of my classmates on my behalf were so outraged and were just like, Miss, you can't ask her things like that. I could live a very healthy and happy, and I've now researched and seen sickle patients who are well into their 80s.
The fact that treatment is improving, we still have way to go, but the fact that treatment is improving will mean that there are people who are living longer with their condition. In the 60s and 70s people would die much earlier because of the complications with their sickle cell and so forth. That is getting better.
Medically, sickle cell has been around over 100 years. However, there are only 2 licensed treatments for sickle cell.
In 2019, we still only have 2 licensed treatments for sickle cell. The first of those is a treatment called hydroxyurea. It's a drug called hydroxycarbamide, or in some cases it's called hydroxyurea. It wasn't invented for sickle cell. It is a cancer drug, but the benefits of it for people who live with sickle cell are quite positive. And the next licensed treatment is transfusions, blood transfusions, or automated red blood cell exchange. So those are the 2, and they have been the 2 staple treatments for a number of decades.
Unfortunately, investment in conditions like sickle cell disease is a lot less in comparison to other conditions, and it is important for us to raise awareness, particularly to policymakers, to funding research, to providing innovative medications to help patients with sickle cell disease.
Although sickle cell is a devastating condition, there are a number of clinical trials on new treatment. There's also an ongoing research on the outcome and health of sickle cell patients, and this includes gene therapy.
There are a number now of clinical trials taking place for new treatments for people who live with sickle cell. At the moment, 2 are currently undergoing technical appraisal with the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, who decide which drugs should be prescribed in this country. So I'm pleased to say for the young children who are living with sickle cell, potentially the future looks brighter than it might have done, say, 20 or 30 years ago, when there was nothing coming out of the pipeline in terms of new treatment.
The Sickle Cell Society is an organization in the UK which has spearheaded campaigns on raising awareness on sickle cell. It was registered in 1979 by a group of patients, parents and health professionals who were all concerned about the lack of understanding and the inadequacy of treatment for people living with sickle cell disorders. The Sickle Cell Society has worked and continue to work in partnership with the Public Health of England.
For us, it's about ensuring that the voice of sickle cell patients informs policy and practice and standards, because that's the way that you improve services.
This year marks the 40th anniversary of the Sickle Cell Society, and the organization has been going from strength to strength.
We celebrate, and we actively celebrate, World Sickle Day in June. We're going to celebrate that. We've got some patient education days up and down the country, and we're having a fundraising gala ball on the 14th of September.
For more information on sickle cell related issues, or want to know more about the 40th anniversary celebration, visit www.sicklecellsociety.org.